I was asked to talk about some of the most iconic colubrids, or basically a top 5 iconic colubrid video. And honestly, it was really hard for me to do that because iconic can mean 1,000 things for 1,000 people. And so I kind of did a little bit of mix. So not necessarily like the most famous, the most recognizable, the biggest, the most expensive, any of that. I just did 5 different colubrids that I think are iconic in their own way, being unmistakable and truly magnificent, all of them in their own rights. And so, in no particular order, we're going to get started. Now, this one is kind of a cheat, which is basically a group of snakes, and that is the tricolored colubrids. So when we think about the tricolored colubrids, we're basically really talking about, with the exception of the South American hognose snake, king snakes and milk snakes, almost all of which belong to the genus Lampropeltis, which in Latin means shield belly, which he is in shed, unfortunately. This is our male milk snake phase Thayer's king snake. He is in shed, so he's a little dull, but you can see how shiny their belly is, hopefully with the camera, even in this shed with this lighting. They're really an amazing group of snakes for a lot of different reasons. So obviously, the first thing you see that is that evolutionary mimicry to where the milks and the kings evolved to look like the venomous elapid coral snakes, which have very similar coloration, which there's that little fun thing like red touches yellow, kill a fellow, red touches black, you're okay, Jack, or what other variations about that. Although we've all now talked, I've even talked about it, but we've all seen that there's a lot of aberration and variation with the coral snake, so that little rhyme isn't necessarily correct. But I digress. These guys are really cool. Some of the largest species of them are the Andeans and the Hondurans. Obviously, the black milk snake being the largest of them, but as they get older, they turn very black. The Andean, it kind of fades a little bit, but the Hondurans and the Andeans maintain that 5.5 to almost 6 foot length with that really amazing striking color. The smallest of which being the scarlet king snake, which is found almost exclusively in Florida, but throughout the southeastern United States. Very small. They don't do really well in captivity, so you don't see them a lot, except for sometimes on like wholesaler or like wild caught order lists and stuff. They really don't do too well in captivity. As I mentioned at the very beginning, there's also the tricolor hognose, but they're not. I don't know. They are really cool and they're absolutely part of this, but to me they just kind of don't quite fit in with these guys. All king snakes and milk snakes, honestly, I believe make some of the best pet reptiles just overall and in general for all levels of experience, from beginner to experts and people who have been keeping them 2-3 times longer than even I have. The most popular of which is probably the Nelsons or the Puebloan milk snakes. They're kind of all over the place. They have some of the most iconic and classic, I guess you could say, looking coloration. Very bold, usually very determinate kind of pattern of that. Sorry, I'm just kind of stumbling over my words really quick. But it looks really great. Probably the next other popular one might be the Honduran milk snake, significantly larger than the other two. And then there's another one that has been kind of colloquially called like the pet store or the pet milk snake, which is usually a mix of the Puebloan and the Nelson, and probably a little bit of the Honduran too, where they just take the different tricolored looking snakes and put them together and call it milk snake or fancy milk snake, depending on whatever like brick and mortar store that you pick them up from, or even online sites. That being said, there is something truly striking about this really vibrant, beautiful colubrid snake. Next are honestly one of my favorite species of snakes, and that is the hognose snake. Now, being in Colorado, I'm actually not really, it's a whole weird gray area, but I actually don't have any hognose snakes of any kind here being in Colorado. Now, throughout the world, there are a couple other different types of hognose. As I mentioned earlier with the Thayers and the tricolor snakes, there's the South American tricolor hogs, as well in Madagascar, there are 3 different subspecies of the giant Madagascar hognose. But really, when we think about hognose, we're really talking about the North American ones that are usually allocated to the easterns, the westerns, and then there's like a southern Mexican one that sometimes gets tied together. These guys are they're absolutely recognizable. They're unmistakable, really. And they are famous, especially right now because of like the onset of social media and like TikTok, to where everybody who has hognose, it is being shown how really cool they are. They're known for their cute little pug noses. They're known for being really small and handleable, as well as being the drama that is the hognose. So when we look at the actual hognose itself, we see this usually very small colubrid. The largest of them usually don't exceed about 2.5 feet long. Think like a really chunky garter snake in length, really what we're talking about. They're usually because, and while the westerns have quite a few different morphs and patterns, and even the easterns have some variations, they're usually a fairly drab looking snake, mostly earthy tones to help blend in with the ground and the terrain that they're living in, as well as the very prominent and named for feature, that little pug nose little snout that, while we think is absolutely adorable, has a real specific purpose, and that is for digging and burying in the ground. There are a lot of snakes do kind of help burrow a little bit, but they usually seek out like rodent burrows and tortoise burrows that already exist and go in there or sometimes widen them. There are some species of snake that in fact dig their own burrows, the hognose being one of them. They are so cool. And then obviously why they're famous, why they are TikTok golden stars, is because of their awesome defense mechanism, which I know from the outside looking in doesn't seem like a very good one, but that is them playing dead, to where if a predator comes up and they're being harassed by a predator, or a goofy dude with a hat going over to go, look at the cute little snake, they will sometimes play dead, or play possum, where they will roll up, flip over, stick their tongue out, and like convulse on the ground and play dead in hopes of deterring the predator from getting something that they think is already dead and spoiled. Amazing little group of snakes. Every time I get a chance to, when I go out of state or go to a place that's actually able to be keeping them, I love to be able to handle them and play with them. They're such cool little colubrids. And one of these days, I don't think I'm ever going to get one again because I'm trying to be a good little noodle and not break the laws. But it'd be really cool to be able to have one. But at the very least, every time I get to leave the state, I get to play with them. It's really, really fun. And they are such an amazing group of colubrid snakes. This one is definitely iconic, but for one that is different than probably any other snakes on this list. And this one is called the keeled rat snake, or the keeled scaled rat snake. Its Latin name, that if you have heard of it, is probably what you would know it by, which is Pitaius carinata, which I'm probably mispronouncing. This is iconic because they are arguably, or at least a contender, for the longest colubrid in the world. The genus Pitaius that it belongs to is a bunch of different snakes a bunch of different Asian rat snakes that belong to this genus that are all very long, large, Asian, mostly southeastern to into getting closer to Central Asian, obviously with the Indian rat snake being the other one that is also very famous for being very long. Now, they average between, with males they think are usually a little bit longer, they average 6 to 9 feet, but the max recorded length of one of them was just over 13 feet long. These guys are huge. They're a diurnal Asian rat snake. They're fairly arboreal. They're found kind of all over the place. A lot of Asian snake species in general, with really the exception of like the bamboo rat snakes, are fairly arboreal in general. They're found throughout essentially the canopy from fairly high up all the way down to the ground. They're diurnal, as I said before. They're very active hunters, which means they're preying on birds as well as rodents and probably a few other reptiles and maybe amphibians as well. We honestly don't know too much about these guys. They're not exported very much, if at all. DM Exotics, which has a much more successful YouTube channel, has dedicated a lot of time and energy into keeping them and raising them up, and he's now starting to breed some of them. And he has a fairly large group of them, and I absolutely recommend that after this video, if you're more interested in these, go check out DM Exotics. He is basically like a little species profile just of these, as well as some of the other ones that he's been keeping for a while, that they get to know a little bit about these. And yeah, I think he actually did a full video talking about, and he pulled out every single individual snake of the species, the carinata species that he has, and talked a little bit about them. They seem to be a little bit varied. It's not like, you know, some are very black, some are very pale, but the actual scalation and color is a little bit varied. Their personalities are fairly varied as well, to where it's not really like, oh, it's a ball python, they're all easy, it's a king snake, they're all superfood motivated. They have fairly varied personalities, as well as they seem to have changed a little bit from coming into captivity, either getting a little bit more cantankerous or getting very mellow as well. Obviously, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but they're called the keeled rat snake because, just like the Pituophis, so the bull snakes and pine snakes and even rattlesnakes, they have keeled scales, which if you look really close on the, like a close-up of their scalations, they're not soft and smooth like many snake species. There's actually a little horizontal ridge that runs the length of it that actually sticks out a little bit farther, giving it, and that's what we call a keel, hence the keeled Asian rat snake. This is a really cool species of snake, the one that I don't think I will ever be owning, but given an opportunity to be able to handle one or work with them is one that I would absolutely jump on, and this is such a cool species of snake. This next one on the list is another one that's kind of cheating, where it's actually a group of snakes, and that is the white snakes. So now when we think about the white snakes, obviously the first ones we think about are probably the bell ball pythons, right? The blue-eyed leucistic ball pythons. Well, really some of the first leucistic snakes that we saw pop up weren't from the ball pythons, which includes like the super fires and the super lessers and all of that, but they were from different colubrid species. In the hobby, there are quite a few different blue-eyed leucistic and just leucistic white snakes in general, obviously leucism being different than albino. Leucism essentially masks all pigmentation. Albinism is the reduction or the complete lack of pigmentation, usually being melanin. So with leucistic, it completely covers and changes and masks the pattern. Oftentimes that changes the eye color of the iris of the animal. Albinism is lack of or reduction of pigmentation, right? Okay, cool. So with colubrids, there's quite a few different species of them. When we very first saw them, a lot of them were like the Texas rat snakes, as well as several other ones have popped up along the road, which includes gray-banded king snakes, western hognoses, and several other ones. Then the blue-eyed leucistics very specifically, because they also have been turned up, there's also like leucistic cobras and stuff. There's something almost mystifying about white snakes where they have, number one, because they don't even look real. Like, obviously, if we're in the hobby and we've gotten used to them, but someone who really doesn't understand animals or knows a whole lot about them, especially about reptiles and snakes, honestly, they don't even look real. Like, they look fake or made up or photoshopped. So where, if you're ever doing like an animal education program or just kind of talking about them or showing pictures of your animals, it kind of renders people a little bit more open to the idea of getting more used to reptiles because it doesn't quite look like a snake is supposed to look. So for instance, whenever I'm doing that and I see someone that's very intimidated or hesitant, hesitant of the snake, I will get an animal that looks a little off, like a blue-eyed leucistic, ball python, or a highway one, or one that's really brightly colored that doesn't look like one of like the tricolor snakes, to kind of open them up and get them used to that. They're such a cool type of animal. I do have one leucistic colubrid. It's a leucistic western or Texas rat snake, but he is a jerk. He is in shed, and he wanted nothing to do with me, so I left him over there because, as I have mentioned in many of my videos, I prefer not to have any sort of bites, even if it is on me or a mistaken identity or just wants to be left alone. I don't like doing bites or feeding videos, so he's over there. That being said, just a really cool group of animals. As I said before, there is that like mystifying feel that they have around them. They're even revered and venerated in several different Eastern cultures, and they're just such amazing animals that hopefully one of these days I'll get into more. Right now, most of the leucistics things that I work with are ball pythons. I mean, there are quite a few other different leucistic snakes out there that aren't just colubrids. I did a whole video about that. I'll try to remember to put a link for it right here, and I go into much more in-depth about a lot of them, but just a really cool group of colubrids and snakes in general. The last one on the list is without a doubt the most striking non-venomous snake in the world. I say non-venomous specifically because there's a lot of vipers and lapids out there that just have crazy, you would not believe, out of this world coloration. But as far as non-venomous colubrids go, you gotta give it up to the San Francisco garter snake. This is an amazingly beautiful snake. Honestly, it's on my dream list of animals that it's, while legally able to be kept under certain circumstances, one that I'll probably never be able to have, even put it on my dream snake video. Now that being said, these guys are one of the most endangered species of snakes in North America, along with the Louisiana pine snake, eastern indigo, black pine snake, and animals like that. Essentially, this is all because of the very specific habitat it needs, as well as human encroaching. So these guys are found, obviously, near San Francisco. They are found in the the furthest north and western, so near the ocean of Santa Cruz County in California. They occupy a very small range, and their habitat seems to be very specific. And they're also very elusive. You would think that this crazy bright animal would be fairly easy to find. They're actually pretty difficult to find out in the wild, even for experienced herpers and biologists looking to study them. They're very cryptid and elusive. Their habitat requirements are, a lot of it has to do with the food that they eat, and it's very reliant on that to where they're found. So they're a garter snake. So when you think about a garter snake, they're in the same kind of family as the Nerodia, the water snakes. And a lot of them eat a lot of fish and amphibians and newts and things. And so that's where we're usually going to find them, is near large sources or continuous sources of water, usually near creeks or ponds. But despite the fact that they are very close to the ocean, there's a lot of brackish water that is found in that area and in that habitat, but they can't sustain or live in brackish water. Brackish water being the mix of fresh and salt water. They can't do that. It has to only be fresh water. So that limits the habitat that they already have. Then we think about human encroaching. San Francisco obviously being a hugely human dense populated area with lots of urban sprawl and a lot of people going out in and out of the different parks, the very few parks that they have in and out of there. So a lot of human encroaching. So their habitat is restricted again. Then a lot of the reasons why the scientists think they are so endangered is because of their diets. They love to eat frogs, and in fact the Pacific tree frog seems to be almost the mainstay or staple diet of specifically young San Francisco garters. And the Pacific tree frog's population is starting to diminish as well, which then puts strain on the predators, the San Francisco garter snakes. As well as they have now invasive bullfrogs in the area, while the young ones, or the tadpoles that are starting to metamorphosize, just like with the Pacific tree frogs, young and even adult garter snakes are able to prey upon. Adult bullfrogs actually eat young San Francisco garter snakes. So that's another thing on top of there. So it's really unfortunate that they are so endangered, and for a long time they were illegally harvested for the pet trade, but that really has been non-existent for the last 20 or so years. There are select people in the hobby that do in fact have legally obtained San Francisco garter snakes, and just like the eastern indigos, it requires special permitting to be able to ship across states. They're obviously very rare, they're obviously very expensive, and to be completely honest with you, if that was something that you really be looking into, I would go looking for, say, like a California garter snake or a Pacific red-sided garter snake that looks very similar. They're essentially other different subspecies of the same one of the San Francisco. Now, with that being said, recent DNA analysis of people, as I've mentioned before in a number of videos where we've talked about taxonomy and classification being basically just being hokum, really, to where all the scientists and biologists are always infighting with each other about what should be classified as what through all different sorts of means. DNA analysis has shown that there is a possibility that the San Francisco garter snake isn't a true subspecies, and is in fact really more just like a locale of other different subspecies in that kind of Pacific or California garter snake clade, I believe is the correct terminology, which a biologist will probably yell at me for missaying that. But that being said, I still think that just how rare they are and almost distinctive as they are, they definitely do deserve enough respect to really still be considered endangered, especially in that area, and they should still continue to be protected and not be allowed to be harvested from the pet trade until populations definitely increase, and then that's another conversation we can have down the road. That being said, I really hope you did enjoy this video. Like I said before at the beginning, the iconic Colubrids is really up for interpretation, but I feel like these different species and different groups of snakes are some of the most remarkable, easily defined, and just memorable snakes that when you see one, everyone who loves animals, and especially snakes and reptiles, go, ooh, every time you see it, including me that even has a lot of them. It's so cool. I love these species of snakes. If anybody would like to see or hear me talk about anything else, please let me know down in the comments. I do remember, I take note, I have my snake notebook that I always write down all of my stuff, that I do keep track of that for all the different ideas that either I can do or ones, I try not to do too many that other YouTubers do. Like there's some that, obviously the top 5 list, that Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles is very famous for. He does an amazing job of doing those, but I like to do either something a little different or ones that he hasn't done. But if you'd like to get my own take of some of the topics he's talked about, let me know down in the comments. I try not to poach too much from other YouTubers, even with my own spin on it. But just if there's anything you'd like to see, let me know down in the comments. I have links to US Ark, my Patreon, all other fun stuff at the bottom in the description of this video, as well as every other video. If you'd like to stay up to date what's going on with our ability to fight for our rights to keep all of these reptiles, because that is under attack right now, although I imagine if you watch my videos you already know that, so make sure you check out the link to US Ark down below, as well if you are interested in merchandise, special video tours, what's going on with me, clutches that are being hatched, road trips and things that I'm getting onto, a little bit ahead of time of what everybody else, as well as animals that I haven't even released on any other social media outside of Patreon. You can check that out, a bunch of different variant things to kind of help support what I'm doing. If you enjoy this sort of content, I'm going to continue to do so the best that I can, but if you'd like to support that and help me out, it's greatly appreciated. That being said, again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're having a great day. Stay tuned for more reptile content, and we will check you next time.